Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So I'm in London, and behind me you can see Lansdowne House. It's now the Lansdowne Club, but this is where the Marquess of Lansdowne spent the latter part of his life and indeed died. So Lord Lansdowne was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1782 to 83, only for a period of about 8 months. So he was William Petty Fitzmaurice, that was his name, and that's why this street is Fitzmaurice Place. He was born in Dublin in 1737, an Irish aristocrat on both sides. Now his family had come from England a few generations earlier. He was baptised in the Church of Ireland. He spoke English, he couldn't speak Irish, and he was privately educated. But in those days that meant having a tutor, not just going to a fee-paying school. Well, almost every school was fee-paying in those days. So his family owned extensive estates in the countryside, and he spent much of his boyhood far away from Dublin in the most thinly peopled parts of the country. So he had a good grounding in classics, French, things like that, but he didn't warm to his tutors, felt they were a bit closed-minded. One of his ancestors had been, William Petty had been a doctor, surveyor general of Ireland, and arguably the founder of economics. He certainly believed in a free trade, in a minimalist state. And Lord Lansdowne, our Lord Lansdowne, he was to meet other really progenitors of economics, well, like Adam Smith later on, who built on the foundations of William Petty. So his earlier title was the Earl of Shelburne. Shelburne's a place in Wexford, and in Irish means seat of the Britons. When we're talking about Britons then, we really meant the Welsh, like surnames like Brannock refer to the Welsh because they are the ancient Britons. And he was only subsequently he was ennobled Marquess of Lansdowne, so known as Lord Lansdowne. Indeed, there's Lansdowne Road in Dublin, and of course our national rugby stadium is called Lansdowne Road. I'm not sure if it's specifically in honour of him, perhaps. So then he went to Oxford University, and he attended Christ Church, which was then regarded as the grandest college in Oxford, probably still is, and perhaps the most aristocratic. So he said that really helped him. He made connections with a lot of the upper class. The Irish upper class, the English upper class were largely the same, were very intermarried. The Irish upper class was almost exclusively Protestant and English speaking, because the Catholic majority were discriminated by law in Ireland, well, and indeed were in Great Britain. All sorts of public offices we couldn't hold. You had to take an oath abjuring papal authority and so forth. So he then was commissioned into one of the regiments of foot in the British Army. He'd never joined the Irish Army. So the 7 years of war was on, and he served at the Battle of Minden, various places in Germany. France was the United Kingdom's principal enemy, and there were two major alliances. The Holy Roman Empire still existed then, consisted of this smorgasbord of 360 states across much of Germany and Central Europe, some of them fully independent. The Holy Roman Empire was not very united, some of them semi-independent, some of them quite large, like Bavaria, Prussia, some of them really tiny, really under Austrian domination. The Holy Roman Emperor was always a Habsburg, well, for centuries, even though it was an elected position, elected only by about 7 men. And so Elector was a title like Elector of Hanover or Elector Palatine and so forth. So it wasn't a popular election, but the Habsburgs, by a judicious combination of stick and carrot, managed to make sure that they always got it. He said under James Wolfe, the guy who later stormed the Heights of Abraham in Quebec, as in claimed Canada for the British. Wolfe was also Irish, though. A lot of people don't seem to realise that, and a distant relation of Theobald Wolfe Tone, something that Irish Republicans probably rather overlook. So back to William Petty Fitzmaurice. He was a Whig in politics, and served under Lord Rockingham for a while, and he was an ally of Pitt the Elder, who was later ennobled as the Earl of Chatham. And our man here, William Petty Fitzmaurice, he had then this title, Lansdowne. I think it's somewhere in Great Britain, which is why he was in the House of Lords. Because if you had an Irish title related to a place in Ireland prior to 1800, then he could be in the Irish House of Lords. Indeed he was, but hardly ever went there. But you wouldn't be in the House of Lords of Great Britain. But if it's a title relating to Ireland created after 1800, then he would, when that came to that. And he lived on after the Union. So yeah, he was a Whig, and when the 13 colonies, as they then were demanding significant reform, he, like Pitt the Elder, believed that the United Kingdom ought to make sensible concessions, and that would avert bloodshed, and that would avert America actually going for independence. But by this stage, Pitt the Elder had lost office, but obviously a huge amount of money had been expended on the 7 Years' War. It's known in the United States as the French and Indian War, and the argument was this was more important to defend America than anywhere else. The United Kingdom itself wasn't under much threat of invasion. The British Empire wasn't what it then became, a few ports on the coast of Africa and India, and the Royal Navy was so dominant the French didn't have much of a chance of gaining those. But America had mainly gained from this, from the British Army being there, and ought to pay tax to defray the huge cost of this. And obviously the American colonists, mostly of British stock, saying, well, you went there accepting that you were under the ultimate authority of London, so you have to go with that. Might say, well, that was a few generations ago. Times have changed, and I don't have to be held to whatever my ancestors supposedly implicitly agreed. And the colonies had gained considerable amount of land that they benefited most, therefore they should help to foot the bill, but they weren't having that. And of course, only a pervert likes paying tax. No taxation without representation. So if they're represented in the Parliament of the United Kingdom, then that might be permissible, but they weren't. Now, that was a little bit impractical because the voyage across the Atlantic was at least 6 weeks. Adam Smith said they ought to be represented, and as the population of America grows and grows, and he was very perspicacious and said it's going to grow enormously, but much greater than that of Great Britain, eventually the capital should shift across the Atlantic from Great Britain to America, and that would be the capital of the British Empire. Anyway, it wasn't to be. So he was out of office for a while when the Tories were Tories were there. Lord North, the Tory Prime Minister at the time of the American Revolution, or the Earl of Guildford was his proper title. Blubbery North was seemed to be never known by Guildford. Anyway, so finally he was out, and things to negotiate with the Continental Congress. I mean, the Battle of Yorktown, a hands-down defeat. France, Spain, and the Netherlands were all menacing the United Kingdom. British merchant shipping had been wrecked by American privateers, and insurance was reeling. So the only thing to do was to negotiate, and so he negotiated with the Americans. He'd met Benjamin Franklin before the American Revolution, and the two formed a good rapport. Franklin, one of the things he wanted was the cession of Canada. Now, Lord Lansdowne wasn't willing to agree to that. Yes, he did want a peace, but not by any price. So the Americans, obviously they'd won, but they didn't want to push it too far. A recrudescence of conflict might not be in their favour. Even if they won, the cost would be very heavy. So they settled for that. I mean, history would have been very different if he had said, okay, you can have Canada too. Saying no Canadians want to join you, they're loyalists, which is largely true, because when the Continental Army attacked Canada, they were repelled. I'm not sure if a single Canadian joined their side. He managed to at least achieve that, the Peace of Paris, but then he was out, and the Duke of Portland was in very briefly before the mince pie administration. Pitt the Younger coming in, the 24-year-old, a sight to make all nations stand and stare, a kingdom entrusted unto a schoolboy's care. Pitt the Younger taking over, because there had been this Fox North coalition briefly, and it just seemed so cynical. The most radical Whig against perhaps the most reactionary Tory. How could this possibly last? Well, it didn't. But they thought, well, Pitt the Younger's not going to last, but then he lasted for 18 years. So that's Lord Lansdowne, who felt despondent at the end of his career, felt that he had accomplished nothing. He married twice. He only had 3 children, and though his second wife was much younger than him, she predeceased him. So he was a bachelor for at least the last 10 years of his life. He died in 1805. He was laid to rest in High Wycombe. He must have had an estate up there. Right, so his progeny goes on to this day. The subsequent Marquis of Lansdowne was a Viceroy of India, Governor General of Canada. He'd held other positions like Home Secretary, Leader of the House of Lords, before he became First Lord of the Treasury. That is enough about the Marquis of Lansdowne. Toodaloo.